These are the 8 richest families that own Alberta, and the money out here is stranger than you'd expect. We've got a man who got rich cleaning up after the oil industry, a father and son who each put in $2,000 and turned it into an $18 billion empire. And at number 1, a dynasty so secretive that if you go looking for them online, you'll find almost nothing, despite the fact they've been quietly running this province since 1898. Let's get into it. Number 8. The Workland family. Let's kick things off with the least glamorous fortune in the entire province, but honestly one of the smartest. Now here's a fact worth sitting with. In an oil economy, everybody piles into the same thing. They go drill. They go looking for the reservoir and raise money for the same thing. If it comes in, they're rich, and if it doesn't, they're finished. Alberta has produced a lot of extremely wealthy people that way, and an enormous number of broke ones as well. David Verkland looked at that entire circus and asked a completely different question. Who cleans up the drilling mess afterwards? Because drilling is filthy. You end up with contaminated soil, drilling mud, produced water, tank bottoms, all this genuinely nasty industrial waste that somebody has to handle. And there are rules about how you handle it. Nobody wanted that job. There's no romance in it. Nobody writes a magazine profile about the guy hauling away the sludge. So he took it. Verkland built his companies around environmental and waste management services for the oil and gas sector, eventually building up what became Tervita, and estimates have put the family fortune somewhere in the region of $1.5 billion, though I'll say clearly that private Alberta fortunes are extremely hard to pin down, and every number in this video is an estimate rather than a bank statement. And the beauty of the model is that it doesn't care what oil is doing. When prices are high, everybody drills like maniacs and generates enormous amounts of waste. When prices collapse and companies start shutting sites down, guess what? That also generates enormous amounts of cleanup work. Boom or bust, somebody has to deal with the mess. He wasn't betting on the price of oil. He was betting on the fact that industry is always dirty, and that has never once been a bad bet. Verkland got rich on the industry's leftovers. There's a man on this list who went straight at the thing itself, and then spent decades quietly letting his business partner take all the credit for it. Number 7. The Markin family. Here's a name that a lot of Albertans know and almost nobody outside the province does, and yet he's part of one of the biggest corporate stories in Canadian energy. Alan Markin was one of the people behind Canadian Natural Resources, which today is one of the largest oil and gas producers in the entire country. And what makes Markin interesting is that he wasn't the loud one in that partnership. He served as chairman for years while somebody else took most of the public attention, and we'll get to that somebody in a couple of entries. His fortune, again as an estimate, has been put in the billion-plus range. But here's why he genuinely belongs on this list, rather than just being a name in an annual report. Markin has poured an enormous amount of that money into health and wellness across Alberta, in a way that is unusually hands-on. He's funded work in mental health, in addiction, in chronic pain, and in the sort of preventative health programs that almost nobody wants to write a check for because you cannot photograph the outcome. Nobody puts their name on a building for people who didn't get sick. And there's something quietly telling about that pattern, because it shows up again and again in Alberta money. The fortunes get made in something extractive and enormous and slightly brutal, and then a huge amount of it gets pointed back at the community, usually into health or education, usually within a couple of 100 kilometers of where it was made. Markin helped build one of the biggest energy companies in Canada. But how do you actually get an edge in oil when everybody around you is drilling the same ground? Simple. You learn to read the rock yourself. Number 6. The Riddle family. Clay Riddell was a geologist. That's the detail that explains everything about this family, because in the oil business there are essentially 2 types of people. There are the financiers, who understand money and hire somebody else to understand rocks. And then there are the geologists, who understand rocks and have to learn money the hard way. Riddell was the second kind, and it turns out that's the better starting point, because he could look at the geology himself and form his own opinion about whether there was anything down there. He didn't have to take somebody's word for it. He founded Paramount Resources in 1976 and built it into a serious oil and gas company, and estimates put the family fortune somewhere north of $1.5 billion. He was also part of the ownership group of the Calgary Flames, because at a certain wealth level in this province, buying into the hockey team appears to be almost compulsory. And what he did next is the part that matters for a video about dynasties, because he handed it over properly. His son Jim Riddell is now president and chief executive of Paramount, and his daughter Sue runs Perpetual Energy. That's a rare thing. Plenty of founders talk about succession and then cling on until they die and leave a mess. Riddell built 2 operating companies and put one of his children on top of each. He died in 2018, and Paramount has kept going, including buying up the Canadian assets of a major American producer. A geologist who read the ground, built a company, and then split it cleanly between his kids so they'd never have to fight over it. Watch how rare that turns out to be by the end of this video. Speaking of a man who made his fortune by reading what nobody else could see, there's a program someone on our team has been curious about called the Billionaire Brain Wave. It's a simple 7-minute audio built around theta brainwave research, the deep focus brain state linked to where big creative ideas come from. You put on headphones once a day, usually with your morning coffee, and that's the whole routine. It's a one-time $39. It comes with bonus guides on money habits and investing basics, and there's a 90-day money-back guarantee. So testing it costs you nothing if it's not for you. If you're watching on your TV, pause and scan the QR code on screen with your phone camera, or tap the first link in the description. Now, back to the next quiet giant on our list. The Riddells made their fortune underneath Alberta. Another family made theirs out of a single wire running into people's living rooms, and then sold it for one of the biggest checks in Canadian corporate history. Number 5. The Shaw family. In the 60s, a man named J.R. Shaw started a small cable television business in Alberta. And if you'd told anybody at the time that this would eventually become one of the biggest telecommunications companies in the country, they'd have laughed at you. Cable was a novelty. It was a wire that got you a slightly better picture. But Shaw understood something that took everybody else about 30 years to catch up to, which is that the wire itself was the asset, not the television channels, the physical connection running into the house. Because whatever people ended up wanting down that wire, whether it was TV or telephone or eventually the entire internet, they'd have to come through him to get it. That business became Shaw Communications, and it grew into a genuine national giant, with the family holding control through a share structure that kept outsiders from ever taking it off them. And then came the exit. In 2023, Shaw Communications was acquired by Rogers in a deal valued in the region of $20 billion, which stands as one of the largest corporate takeovers in Canadian history and effectively ended the family's run as operators. J.R. Shaw himself died in 2020, so he didn't see the deal close, and I find that genuinely poignant. A man spends over 50 years building a company from a cable business in Alberta into a national institution, and the sale that crowns the whole thing happens after he's gone. The family walked away extraordinarily wealthy, and the Shaw name is still all over Alberta philanthropy and all over Calgary. The Shaws cashed out at the top and walked away. One man on this list built his entire career doing the exact opposite, buying hard while everybody around him was panicking. Number 4. N. Murray Edwards. Murray Edwards is not really a dynasty, so he's the one individual on this list, but you cannot make a video about who owns Alberta and leave him out. He grew up in Regina, and his summer jobs were refereeing hockey and working on a garbage crew. He went to the University of Saskatchewan, then took a law degree at Toronto, and he fully intended to be a lawyer. Then, at 28, he changed direction entirely, and the reason is genuinely striking. By his own account, he made a promise to a dying friend, and that promise pushed him out of law and into business. His first move was to get involved in an oil well, and it came up dry, completely dry. Which, if you're going to have that happen, 28 is a much better age for it than 50. And what he learned from it shaped everything after, because he stopped trying to find oil himself and started buying the companies that already had it. His biggest position is Canadian Natural Resources, alongside stakes in Ensign Energy Services and Magellan Aerospace, and estimates have put his fortune somewhere in the $2 to $3 billion range depending on where oil is sitting when you ask. His strategy is the thing worth stealing, though. Edwards is famous for buying aggressively during downturns. When oil crashes, and everybody in Calgary is panicking and selling assets at whatever they can get, he's the buyer. That takes an almost inhuman stomach, because you're writing enormous checks for things that are actively falling in value while people you know are losing their businesses around you. He also co-owns the Calgary Flames and owns resorts of the Canadian Rockies, which runs a string of ski hills. So the kid who refereed hockey games for pocket money now owns part of an NHL team in several mountains. That's about as Alberta as a life gets. Edwards bet on oil coming back up over and over again and kept being right. Now here's a fortune that doesn't care what oil does at all, and it started with $4,000 and 15 trailers. Number 3. The Southern Family. In 1947, a father and son in Calgary each put in $2,000, which is $4,000 between them, and bought 15 utility trailers to rent out around the city. They called it Alberta Trailer Hire. Shorten that and you get ATCO. Ron Southern was still in high school when that started, and he went off to the University of Alberta, took a science degree in 1953, and came back to work in it full-time. He then served as president for 48 years. And what that trailer company turned into is genuinely absurd. ATCO today has total assets in the region of $18 billion and employs thousands of people. And the thing it became famous for is the workforce housing business, which is a much bigger idea than it sounds. When you need to put hundreds of workers somewhere remote and hostile, somebody has to build the accommodation, ship it there, install it, and run it. ATCO does that. Their modular buildings have housed oil sands workers in northern Alberta, construction crews in Abu Dhabi, and I love this detail, shelters in Antarctica. A company that started renting trailers in Calgary now puts buildings on the coldest continent on Earth. Then there's Spruce Meadows, and this is the part that tells you who this family actually is. In 1975, Ron and his wife Margaret built a world-class show jumping facility on the edge of Calgary. And the reason is lovely. They built it because their daughters Nancy and Linda were serious competitive riders. Now think about the pitch for a second. This is Calgary, home of the Stampede, a city built on rodeo and rough stock, and a businessman announces he's building a genteel European show jumping venue. It should have been a disaster. Instead, Spruce Meadows became one of the most respected equestrian venues in the world, hosting athletes from more than 60 nations and drawing millions of spectators. And it also became the site of an annual business roundtable that pulls in chief executives and central bankers. Ron Southern died in 2016 at 85. Estimates put the family fortune somewhere around $2 to $2.5 billion, and his daughter Nancy is now chair and chief executive of ATCO, having taken the top job back in 2003 while Linda runs Spruce Meadows. A father and son with $4,000, a daughter running the empire, and a horse facility built for the kids that ended up on the world stage. That's $4,000 turned into billions. Now watch what $300,000 and a pharmacy franchise turned into, because that one produced the single largest fortune in the entire province. Number 2. The Katz family. Right, let's be completely straight with each other here. By pure net worth, Daryl Katz is number 1 in Alberta. It isn't close, and it isn't a debate. Forbes put him at around $7.2 billion on the 2026 list, which was up roughly $1.5 billion in a single year and moved him more than 60 places up the global rankings, placing him around 542nd in the world. He's the richest person in this province, full stop. But this countdown is about the families that own Alberta, and in a minute, you'll see why the top spot goes somewhere else. First, this story, because it's a genuinely great one. Daryl Katz grew up in Edmonton, went to Jasper Place High School, and took a law degree at the University of Alberta. Then, in 1991, he and his father made a $300,000 bet, which was buying the Canadian rights to a pharmacy franchise called Medicine Shop. $300,000. That's the seed. From there, he did the thing that separates operators from investors, which is that he kept rolling it forward. He acquired Rexall, then Pharma Plus. And he kept going until the Katz Group controlled hundreds of drugstores right across the country, which is an enormous, deeply unglamorous, extremely reliable business. People do not stop needing prescriptions. Then in 2008, he bought the Edmonton Oilers. And that's where his story gets complicated because the Oilers came with a fight. Katz wanted a new downtown arena, and the deal that eventually produced Rogers Place involved significant public money going toward a building for a man who was already a billionaire. That argument was one of the loudest in Edmonton's recent history. Critics said taxpayers were subsidizing a rich man's asset. Supporters said it dragged a neglected downtown back to life. And honestly, a decade on, both of those things turned out to be true at the same time, which is usually how these arguments end. He's also got a foot in Hollywood, having financed films through Silver Pictures, which is a genuinely strange third act for an Edmonton pharmacy magnate. So that's the richest man in Alberta. Pharmacy chains, a hockey team, an arena fight, and a film company. Which brings us to the family that has been here since before Alberta was even a province, and who almost nobody can tell you a single thing about. Number 1. The Mannix family. Try this. Go and search for the Mannix family online right now and see how little comes back. You'll find a couple of corporate pages, a Wikipedia entry that's mostly dates, and a handful of old newspaper pieces. For a family estimated to be worth in the region of $3.3 billion, whose businesses have shaped this province for over a century, there is almost nothing there. No profiles, no interviews, no documentary, nothing. That is not an accident. That is 120-odd years of deliberate effort. And the beginning is perfect, because it starts with a poker game. Or at least, that's the legend that has followed this family around forever, that Frederick Stephen Mannix won an earth-moving machine in a card game. What's documented is that in 1898, Mannix bought a team of horses and took his first earth-moving job as a subcontractor, building branch lines for the Canadian Pacific Railway. A team of horses. In 1898. 7 years before Alberta was even a province. He'd been born on a farm near Stonewall, Manitoba, to a father who'd come over from County Cork in Ireland. And that man built the whole thing from moving dirt for the railway, which is about as literal a foundation as a fortune can have. Now here's the chapter that tells you how tough this family actually is. In the 30s, Frederick was diagnosed with diabetes, and in the early 40s he lost both of his legs. And during the war, the family ran short of capital. So in 1943, they sold a 51% controlling interest in the company to an American firm out of Idaho, on one condition, which was that his son Frederick C. Mannix stayed on as president. They gave up control of their own company, and then, in 1951, the son bought it back off the Americans. The father died later that same year, at 70, with an estate worth around $1 million. The son, Fred C., built it into the Lorem Group, and the name is a lovely piece of insight into how this family thinks, because Lorem is short for Long Range Mannix. Not the Mannix Group. Long Range. Everything about this operation is built to be looked at in decades rather than quarters. The scale of what they built is hard to overstate. Lorem Maintenance of Way became one of the largest railway maintenance and equipment companies in North America. And the Lorem Group became the training ground for an enormous share of Alberta's business establishment, including a young lawyer who worked for them named Peter Lougheed, who would go on to become Premier of Alberta. Which produced one of the great awkward moments in Canadian business, because when Lougheed was Premier in the 70s, the province expropriated land from a Mannix ranch to create Fish Creek Park in South Calgary. And Mannix sued the government for $41 million, eventually settling for $7 million. A family that trained the Premier then took him to court. Fred C. was one of the first 2 living people ever inducted into the Canadian Business Hall of Fame. And in the 70s, he stepped back and split the empire between his 2 sons. Fred P. took what became Mancal. Ron took Coral Holdings. Coal, oil and gas, construction, real estate, railway maintenance. Then in 1997, they did something that only a family thinking in 100-year blocks would do. They sold off most of the energy assets, Minalta Coal and Pembina Pipeline and Pembina Resources, for over $2 billion. Not because the businesses were failing. They sold at the top of the century they'd built, took the money, and used it to sort out the family's estate planning completely. And then, in 1998, they quietly endowed a charitable foundation with $100 million. So here's why they take number 1 over a man worth twice as much. Darrell Katz has the bigger number, and he earned every dollar of it. But the Mannix family got here in 1898 with a team of horses, survived a world war, lost control of their own company and bought it back, trained half the province's business leadership, sued a premier, split cleanly into 2 dynasties, cashed out at the top, and then made themselves almost completely invisible. Money in Alberta is loud. There are hockey teams and arenas and mountains and horse facilities. The Mannixes have been the quiet, structural, 120-year backbone under all of it, and they've spent the entire time making sure you never noticed. And those were the 8 richest families that own Alberta. Notice the pattern running through nearly all of them, though. Almost none of this money is inherited from somewhere else. $4,000 and 15 trailers. $300,000 and a pharmacy franchise. A team of horses in 1898. A geologist reading rock. A man who took the job nobody wanted, which was cleaning up the mess. So which one of these got you? The father and son with $4,000, the pharmacy kid who ended up owning the Oilers, or the family that's been running this place since before it was a province and still won't talk to anybody? Drop it in the comments. And tell me which province you want us to cover next, because we'll do exactly what you ask for. Hit that like button and subscribe to Global Status, because we break down empires like this every single week.